Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to take up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 27th of July 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let's now begin the discussion.
The article Remember Jawans PM Tells People appears on page number 1. Now India is observing 21st anniversary of Kargil Vijay Divas to commemorate the victory in the Kargil War fought in 1999 between India and Pakistan. Now it is important to understand that Kargil War has a very special place in India's defense history. After the war of 1947, 1965 and 71, Kargil War is one of the most important war between India and Pakistan. So we'll start by first analyzing the causes which led up to this war. Now as you know that after the war, a Kargil review committee was set up, and according to which, ever since India took positions at Siachen Glacier, which was in 1984, Pakistan Army had begun its planning and preparation for incursion across LOC. Because Pakistani defense establishment could not digest the fact that India has started to fully control the Siachen Glacier. Then as we all know that in 1998, nuclear tests were conducted by both India as well as Pakistan, which acted as a trigger which led to Pakistan Army and Pakistan-backed Mujahideen intruding the LAC in early 1999. Now these areas of high mountain peaks are extremely cold, and hence there was a tradition that both the sides would come to the lower regions of these areas in winters, and then again in summers army from both the sides would go back to their forward posts. However, it turned out that in winters of 1998 or just before the summers of 1999, the Pakistan-backed militias or Mujahideens stayed back at the forward position. And as soon as summers started to set in, the intrusion was detected in around May of 1999. And then subsequently Operation Vijay was launched, which drove away the intruders out by July 1990. Now later on it emerged that one of the major reasons Pakistan carried out this intrusion was to bring the Kashmir issue into limelight, and that is why Pakistan always portrayed this incursion as done by local Kashmiri militias or guerrilla fighters. Even the soldiers of the Pakistani army were disguised as Kashmiri militants, and this was done to ensure the deniability of the Pakistani state into this particular intrusion. Now the question arises that when the LOC is so long, why did Pakistan choose to attack this particular region, specifically the Kargil? Now if you analyze the strategic significance of Kargil, first and foremost it comprises a bunch of ridges spanning about 170 km which overlook the Srinagar-Leh highway, which is NH1. So this is the Srinagar and this is Leh, and only one road connects, and controlling these peaks would give complete control to Pakistan over this particular road. Cutting it off would essentially mean loosening the control of India over Ladakh region, which would have then emboldened China. Besides cutting this particular link to Ladakh, loss of Kargil would have made it extremely difficult for India to maintain control of Siachen Glacier. Now as far as significance of Kargil War is concerned, it brought a lot of changes in our security architecture. But we will discuss them later. But first and foremost, it was significant for the impact and influence of the mass media on public opinion in both nations. Coming at a time of exploding growth in electronic journalism in India, the Kargil news stories and war footages were often telecast live on TV. And many websites provided in-depth analysis of the war based on these footages and locations. So in the sense that this was the first conflict which was telecasted live. Also, the inability of India's security architecture to detect the infiltration when it began led to a major shakeup. Starting with the establishment of National Technical Research Organization in 2004, which was a major overhaul of intelligence network, it also led to the changes in defense procurements. For example, The most radical reform was the establishment of Defense Procurement Procedure in 2003 and establishment of Defense Acquisition Council and Defense Procurement Board to institutionalize the decision making in defense procurement. Also, a task force on border management was created and National Security Council headed by National Security Advisor or NSA was strengthened. Also, Arun Singh Committee on Defense Management was set up, which had recommended the creation of a post of Chief of Defense Staff, as you know, that which has been recently fulfilled. So these are the important aspects of Kargil War which you should be aware of. This is also the time to remember around 600 brave Indian soldiers and pilots who laid their life to defend Kargil for us. A big shout out to them and their families. Let's now move on to the next news. As you know that this is a monsoon season and also a season of major floods across the country. So in this regard, a news appears on page number 1, 5 drowned in Assam, flood toll crosses 100. Similarly, another news appears on page number 9 with respect to flood situation in Bihar. Over 14 lakh affected by Bihar floods. Now, flood as a disaster is very important from the perspective of UPSC examination. Questions can be asked in both prelims as well as mains examination. In the past, UPSC has also asked question on flood, but that was focused on urban floods. So we shall first understand what flood actually means. What is the basic or the underlying cause behind a flood with the help of diagram. Then we'll go into the details of what are the major causes, both man-made as well as natural, which lead to floods. What are the major impact of the floods? And then finally, we will look at how the flood management or prevention is taken care of in India. So let us now begin the discussion from the very basic. What is actually a flood? So if you give a one-line definition, then flood is obviously overflow of water, which leads to the submergence of dry land, which are normally not submerged. I would like you to focus on this particular diagram and consider that this is the river channel and these are the natural levees which have been created. Now a flood situation means that water spills over these natural levees and submerges the area surrounding the river. The basic cause of that is that when the discharge of the river exceeds the capacity of the river channel to hold that water, which causes the spill. Now all the causes leading to flood can be distributed on the left or the right side. For example, heavy rainfall increases the discharge of the river, whereas the capacity of river channel is constant, and this leads to spillover. On the other hand, siltation of the bed of the river reduces the carrying capacity of the river channel, leading to the spill. So ultimately, it's the balance of the discharge of the river to that of the capacity of the river channel to carry that water, which decides that whether the flood will occur or not. If you talk about the overall causes, they can be segregated into man-made and natural. Now, of course, it needs to be cleared right at the outset that there is rarely any flood which is caused due to only one of these causes. Usually, especially given in the current context, most of the floods are a combination of these factors. We'll start our discussion with the natural factors or the factors which have been traditionally the cause of floods across the globe. Now, one of the major factors to increase the discharge of the river is heavy precipitation. Now, as you know that India receives 80% of its annual rainfall during the southwest monsoon season of June to September. Now, rainfall over the country during this season shows a wide range of variation due to various factors, either orthographic or increased rainfall due to rain-bearing systems like cyclones. Cloudbursts play an important role in the Himalayan region. So all these factors lead to increasing discharge of the river during 3 to 4 months of the year, which is monsoon season, and hence there is a regular occurrence of flood in areas indicated with red color due to heavy precipitation or monsoonal rainfall. Now the second important reason for natural causes of floods is that of increasing deposition either on the riverbed, as we just saw in the first slide, or at the mouth of the river. Now, if we talk about the deposition on riverbeds, it is mainly due to the erosion of the river itself from the mountainous regions. Whereas if we talk about the deposition or the siltation on the mouth of the river, that is on the delta side, this deposition of silt occurs mainly due to sea tides and waves. which deteriorates the discharging capacity of the rivers by way of blocking the flow of the river, and hence the discharge of the river is stopped, leading to the spillover. Then of course the change in the channel of the river in which the main discharge is flowing will lead to flooding, and finally landslide leads to blocking of the flow or the discharge of the river, leading to spillover. So these are the natural causes which have been traditionally responsible for causing floods across the country. But now, as the imprints of the humans on the nature and environment is increasing, obviously the man-made causes are also playing a key role in causing these floods. So first and foremost is about the settlements in the floodplains. And this is a major cause of floods, especially in urban areas. For example, there is a river which has a channel, and then you must have read the area surrounding the channel is called a floodplain. Now it is called a floodplain because of a particular reason. Under normal circumstances, every monsoon season, the spillover from the river banks will usually inundate this particular floodplain, and these floodplains are also characterized by a particular type of deposition. Now, due to increasing land density and demand for land in the urban areas, what people do is that they start to settle in these floodplains. And obviously, when due to natural reasons, that is increasing precipitation, the flood comes, it leads to inundation of this huge human settlement, leading to floods. Another important reason leading to increasing frequency of floods, especially in urban areas, is the disappearance of natural wetlands. And this is one of the important reasons why we had devastating floods in Kashmir as well as in Chennai. Now you must have read about wetlands with respect to Ramsar sites. But not only for biodiversity, but also for flood prevention, existence of these natural wetlands is very important. What happens is that they act as a natural absorbers of extra water. So whenever there is a spill of water from the rivers, the existence of these wetlands helps in absorbing this extra water into the reservoirs. Now, due to the human greed, we have encroached upon almost all the wetlands, which has led to practical decimation of these natural water bodies from our urban landscape. On top of that, almost all the urban areas has been covered with concrete, which leaves nowhere for this extra water either to be absorbed by groundwater or by wetlands, causing devastating floods in urban areas which require massive human intervention in form of evacuation as well as pumping out of water to save them from the floods. Now another major reason which is man-made is deforestation. Now there are various ways through which deforestation can be held responsible for causing flood, especially in mountainous regions. Now first and foremost, deforestation results in decreased water holding capacity of the soil, which basically results in the reduction in the amount of water that infiltrates into the groundwater. As well as deforestation leads to higher level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which causes global warming, which again results in the higher melting of the glaciers. And there is a third impact also, and that is due to deforestation, a lot of silt or the soil or the topsoil washes away into river channels. Now due to this extra load, the speed at which the water flows reduces. Now this reduction in the speed of the discharge of the river, when combined with increasing precipitation, leads to the spillover. And finally, one of the major reasons for flood in recent times and the reasons behind most devastating floods is that of dam management. Now we obviously understand that out of all the reasons, dams are also built to control floods. However, they are also responsible for the increasing frequency of the floods. Now in the normal circumstances, dams regulate the flow of the water, provide water for electricity generation and irrigation as well as other needs. If the dams are not taken care of very properly, then they lead to flood. For example, if the dams are very old and dilapidated, then they might collapse, which will lead to the release of too much water, which the river channel will not be able to handle. With time, there is a gradual deposition of the silt in the dam, which then results in overflow. And also, if these two things are taken care of, then the decisions about when to open the gates of the dam become very, very crucial. Now, we obviously understand that weather forecasting in India, even right now, is not very precise. And hence, the decision about the release and the storage of the water become very, very crucial. And even the slightest of error in the judgment about these opening of gates and release of the water can cause havoc both in downstream as well as upstream of the river. And realizing the importance of dam management, there is a bill which has been tabled in the parliament, Dam Safety Bill. Now let us discuss the impact of these floods. Now the overall impacts of these floods can be categorized into two sections, socio-economic impact as well as political impact. But these are negative impacts. What about the positive impacts? Now it is your duty to find out that whether there are some positive impacts of the floods or not and give it out in the comment section. Now as far as negative socio-economic impacts of floods are concerned, we can categorize them into various sections. For example, first and foremost is not very difficult to think that it leads to a loss of life as well as property. And how it impacts the rural areas of our country can be understood by understanding the impact of floods on agriculture. Now, recurrent floods impact the agricultural sector adversely. Due to recurrent floods, fields get submerged and lead to loss of harvest. Also, it leads to the death of a lot of animals, which together causes a huge damage to agricultural section, which together causes a great damage to the production. Apart from that, you know that a lot of grain is kept as a stock. Flood causes submergence, which leads to complete destruction of these stocks, leading to massive devastation of agricultural sector in the regions where the flood occur. Impact on the infrastructure is not unknown and is very common. Recurrent flood cause severe damage to economic infrastructure. For example, disruption of transport and electricity networks. As far as the social impacts of floods are concerned, there are two such main impacts. Now, the first direct impact is that floods induce immediate mass migration. Frequent flooding results in loss of livelihoods. Obviously, as people see water approaching their settlements, they start to retreat and hence they are uprooted from their native places. Although they eventually return back to the same place, but the life never remains normal like before because of the above two factors. It takes a lot of time to rebuild their livelihood. Now, occurrence of a flood in a particular region increase the possibility of waterborne diseases because lack of proper drinking water facilities, contamination of water, both groundwater as well as piped drinking water, leads to epidemics like diarrhea. But as the water retreats, it leaves a lot of patches of water, which eventually becomes the breeding ground for mosquitoes, leading to outbreak of malaria. Let us now focus our attention to political impacts. Now, this impact is majorly felt in developing countries like India, where the response of the government is very ineffective, especially in terms of relief operations during major flood events, which leads to public discontent and failure of the government to prevent a recurrent flood in the same region finally or eventually leads to loss of trust of the people in the government. Now, you must have seen that the regions which are flood prone like Assam, Bihar, also lack in level of development if compared to other states. Now, there are other reasons as well, but frequent floods are also one of the major reasons responsible for their backwardness and hence leads to a regional disparity. So overall ramifications of the floods are very wide and it is important to keep these things in mind. Now we move on to the management or prevention of the floods. Now, since the primary responsibility for management and prevention of the flood lies on the state governments, there is a varied response across country. Some states are very efficient in management of floods, whereas others are not as much efficient. Now, if we talk about the major responsibility of the central government, it supplements the steps taken by the state government financially as well as logistically. Now, you must have seen Air Force helicopters evacuating people in flooded regions. So that is the kind of support central government extends to the states. But generally, as a response to flood, there are two kinds of steps which are taken. Now, first one is that of immediate, which needs to be immediately done in the aftermath of a flood. First of them is immediate relief to the people who are impacted by the flood in form of food supplies and financial help. Also, evacuation if necessary, and extending appropriate medical attention to all those people. If we talk about the long-term measures, now if these steps taken appropriately by all the state governments, the threat of the floods and especially the recurrence of the floods can be avoided. Now first and foremost is that of mapping of a flood prone region. Now you know that in India at macro level we have already done the mapping of flood prone zones. But there is a need to go deeper and magnify this map. And not every state has carried out the micro mapping, which focus on the local causes of floods and areas which can be flooded due to causes which are very local in nature. Once the mapping is done, there is a need to confirm the land use according to that particular map. So for example, there is a need to prevent the settlements in flood prone regions like floodplains. There is a need to de-encroach the wetlands. As we have understood that deforestation is one of the major causes of floods and how it can contribute in various ways to floods, there is a need for massive afforestation drives, especially in hilly regions. There is a need for rejuvenation of wetlands, especially in urban areas. The dam management should be scientific and should be based on coordination among states. And finally, there is a need for interlinking of the rivers, especially that of Ganga basin with the peninsular rivers. This important step will balance out the extra supply in the Ganga and Brahmaputra basin to southern states or in dams, which can then be successively utilized when there are droughts. So this is it as far as the discussion on floods is concerned. From the perspective of mains examination, it is important to understand what floods are, what are the various reasons which cause the flood, what are their negative impacts with respect to economy, sociology, as well as polity, and finally, what are the ways in which we can manage or prevent the flood. A set of 3 news articles appear on page number 6. All of them are editorial. Scandalizing as Contempt, The Chilling Effect of Criminal Contempt, A Motorcycle and the Art of Court Management. Now all these editorials have been published with regard to the contempt proceedings which have been recently initiated against a noted lawyer, Mr. Prashant Bhushan. It all began when a photograph of Chief Justice of India sitting on a motorbike appeared on which Prashant Bhushan did these tweets. Post that, a criminal contempt has been initiated, and this has led to a massive debate in legal fraternity as to what is the current relevance of the contempt of the court procedures in Indian democracy. So just like all the matters dealing with polity, we will start by first understanding the constitutional provisions related to the contempt of the court. Now first you should understand that contempt has been mentioned in the Constitution in Article 129, Article 142 and Article 215. Article 129 grants Supreme Court the power to punish for contempt of itself, and the similar power has been given to the High Court by Article 215. Whereas Article 142 Clause 2 enables the Supreme Court to investigate and punish any person for its contempt. So these 3 articles provide exclusive powers to High Court and Supreme Court as far as contempts are concerned. However, the problem is that the expression as to what contempt of court means has not been defined by the Constitution. And that is done through Contempt of the Court Act 1971, which has defined the contempt to mean an offense of showing disrespect to the dignity or authority of a court, and it has specifically divided all kinds of contempt into 2 portions: civil contempt and criminal contempt. Now, any kind of willful disobedience to any judgment, order, decree or writ of the court or any other process of the court, or willful breach of an undertaking given in the front of the court shall be constituted as civil contempt. Whereas scandalizing the court by lowering its authority, interference in the due course of judicial proceeding, and obstruction in the administration of justice of a court shall be considered as criminal contempt. Now, if you understand, a tweet by Prashant Bhushan would qualify in the first category, and hence a procedure of criminal contempt has been initiated against him because he published a series of tweets which can be taken as scandalizing the judges of higher judiciary. Although this is not the first time that Mr. Prashant Bhushan has entered into scuffle with the judges of the Supreme Court, but this time the action has been very stern from the judges' side. Now, before moving into the arguments for and against the contempt of court in India, I would like to make it clear that all these points have been taken from the editorial, so we are not responsible for any of these arguments. Now, moving on to why we need court of contempt, or why is there a need for any kind of such powers. Now, we know that independence of judiciary is very, very important for constitutionalism as well as democracy, and hence the concept of contempt exists to insulate the judiciary from unfair attacks and prevent a sudden fall in judiciary's reputation in public eye. So while filing this case, Supreme Court has said that these tweets brought the administration of justice in disrepute and are capable of undermining the dignity and authority of the institution and the office of Chief Justice of India in particular. Apart from that, provisions of contempt safeguards the interests of public, because if the authority of the court is denigrated itself, then the public confidence in the administration of justice will be weakened, which will not be good for the stability and continuity of the India itself. Now, you should know that administration of justice is not fulfilled just by giving of the orders and passing of the judgments by the courts themselves. They also need the power to ensure that those orders are carried out, and hence the contempt powers are needed to punish willful disobedience to court orders, which is done through civil contempt, and also to ensure that no one stands or interferes in the administration of the justice or threatens the judges. So these are the arguments which suggest that yes, there is a need for existence of contempt power in Indian democratic setup. But let's now analyze equally compelling arguments which suggest otherwise. Now, first and foremost, let us now begin the arguments against by taking example from two democratic countries, UK and USA. Now, although contempt power exists both in UK and USA, the Law Commission has recommended in 2012 that it shall be abolished. Whereas in USA, no such action has been taken, but the judges themselves have ensured that there is no contempt proceeding initiated against anyone in last 5 to 6 decades. So you can say that even though the provisions exist in USA, they are not used. Also, England abolished the offence of scandalizing the court in 2013. Which essentially means that all the publications and literature criticizing the judgments or the behavior of the judges are immune against any kinds of contempt proceedings. Also, you should understand that the major problem is that the definition of criminal contempt in Indian context is extremely wide and can be easily invoked by the judges. Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer famously termed the law of contempt as having a vague and wandering jurisdiction with uncertain boundaries. Also, the scenarios are fast changing. Increasing digitalization and access to internet has swelled the number of social media users. And in the era of social media, all kinds of personal and public views are being expressed on these social media platforms. Now, obviously, it does not look good on higher judiciary, according to the authors, that they keep track of these social media platforms to find out which person is talking ill about the higher judiciary. Also, according to the authors, the invoking of scandalizing of the court every time has a negative impact on the image of this esteemed institution itself. Because whenever such action is initiated at the highest court of justice, people tend to believe that the court has something to hide, which is not good overall. And hence, according to a major section of lawyers and constitutional thinkers, the court's international institutional standing will be lowered if it takes up this case in this manner at this particular time. Ultimately, it's in the hands of Parliament to decide and evaluate the need for contempt law, but this whole discussion is enough for your prelims as well as mains examination point of view. Now, this particular article, A Revolution in Policy Mindset, appears on page number 7. Now, this article is quite peripheral and not so much important from the perspective of both prelims and mains examination. So we'll shortly go through key points highlighted in this article. And then the important part is that how to prepare and why to prepare sustainable development goals. Because preparation for UPSC is not always about what, but it is also about how. So first, let's just quickly finish the main arguments which have been raised in this particular article. So this particular article has been written by 3 officials of United Nations, and hence it is important that the points they raise should be kept in mind. So they highlight a very important point, and that is that Asia and Pacific region was already lagging behind in achievement of these sustainable development goals and their targets. And the impact of COVID-19 has dented their progress much more than the other regions of the world. But according to them, there is a silver lining as well, and those are the strategies which the nations in this region have adopted to counter the impact of pandemic. So if you see, there is continuous trend towards extension of universal healthcare. For example, in India itself, there is a free testing of COVID-19. Various other countries are also approaching towards universal healthcare. So this is a progress towards health. Then cash transfers have been adopted by almost all countries and developing countries of this region. Also, there is an emphasis on food distribution and extension of credit to poor. So if you'll see, all these mechanisms evolved to counter the impacts of pandemic are in turn serving the sustainable development goal targets. But just to mention in brief here that goal number 1 is ending poverty. So cash transfer, food distribution and extension of credits to poor will directly take care of that. Then the SDG 3 is about good health and well-being. So this is serving that target. But author wants to say that this is temporary, and all these steps taken by these countries should continue to serve the poor people across these regions even after the COVID-19 has ended. Now these case studies are important as mentioned by the author in the article itself, that how steps taken by 3 Asian countries is serving the SDG 13, which is about climate action. Now South Korea has brought in new policy which is known as New Deal, which is based on 2 pillars. Second one is important, and that is decarbonization. Similarly, the focus of India on renewable energy is hidden from no one. And China has also promised to create more jobs in renewable sector than in those sectors which are dependent on fossil fuels, and has also started to take very credible steps towards those. Now, if these countries carry forward their renewable and clean energy agenda and do not retract back these steps which have been floated out during COVID-19 pandemic, then authors suggest that the achievement of sustainable development goal targets will not be a big deal even for this region. Now moving on to why understanding of sustainable development goals and knowledge about them is very important. In 2016, UPSC has asked, consider the following statements. The Sustainable Development Goals were first proposed in 1972 by a global think tank called the Club of Rome. And statement 2, the Sustainable Development Goals have to be achieved by 2030. Now in this, the second statement is correct, whereas the first one is not correct. Because the Club of Rome came out with limits to growth concept about sustainability. They did not propose sustainable development goals as such, although they did talk about the sustainability of the development. Not just the prelims examination, but even in mains examination, UPSC has asked, access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy is the sine qua non to achieve sustainable development goals. Comment on the progress made in India in this regard. Now this access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy is one of the goals out of those 17 SDGs. So now you can understand how specific UPSC can be in asking about these SDGs. So let us now understand how to prepare them. So if you go to the website of Sustainable Development Goals, you can see all the development goals tabulated in thumbnail form on its website. All the 17 goals along with details are given over there. So the Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is about zero poverty or no poverty. If we click that, you can see a little bit of introduction written over there. And this introduction is also updated because it mentions COVID-19 crisis also. So you can see how updated this website is, and you can utilize this website for your mains as well as prelims preparation. So there are various sections on the poverty goal. So if you scroll down, you will see facts and figures. You will see goal 1 targets. Now, as far as the facts and figures are concerned, you can see that these 6 facts are given. For example, According to most recent estimates, in 2015, 10% of the world's population, or around more than 700 million people, lived on less than $1.9 a day, which means below the global poverty line. Which means that so many people are living almost below poverty line. Similarly, Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are expected to see the largest increases in extreme poverty, with an additional 32 million and 26 million people respectively living below the international poverty line as a result of pandemic. So whenever you have to look for an introduction or a conclusion in mains as well as for essay, you can utilize these facts and figures, and since they are given by United Nations on SDG's website, they are most credible source of data. Similarly, if you go to the target section of the goal 1, you can see that there are 5 targets. The first target is that by 2030, which is the deadline to achieve all these SDGs itself, the target is to eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere. So there are no conditions as far as removal of poverty is concerned. The target is absolute, that we have to eradicate extreme poverty. And what is extreme poverty? The people who are living under $1.25 a day. So the aim is that by 2030 there should not be a single person who is living on less than $1.25 a day. So this was about extreme poverty. What about poverty? The target is to reduce at least by half the proportion of men, women and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to national definitions. So now the target has been made subjective. In the first target, it was absolute, that whether a person is living in America or in Africa or in India, it doesn't matter, that person has to live on more than $1.25 a day, because that is extreme poverty. As far as poverty is concerned, we have to reduce the people living below the poverty lines by half according to the national definitions. So according to the definition of India, whatever is the criteria for deciding the poverty line, we have to reduce the number of people living below that poverty line by half. So similarly, there are other targets also. Now we are not going to discuss all these goals in detail, but we'll just take a look at the goal number and the major theme. So just like goal 1 is about no poverty, goal 2 is about zero hunger, goal 3 is about good health and well-being, goal 4 is about quality education, goal 5 is about gender equality, goal 6 is about clean water and sanitation, goal 7 is about affordable and clean energy, goal 8 is about decent work and economic growth, goal 9 is about industry, innovation and infrastructure, goal 10 is about reduced inequalities, goal 11 is about sustainable cities and communities, goal 12 is about responsible consumption and production, goal 13 is about climate action, goal 14 is about life below water, goal 15 is about life on land, goal 16 is about peace, justice and strong institutions, and goal 17 is about partnerships. Now it is very important that you at least memorize these goals along with their major ambitions. An article appears on page number 1, 200 proposals from China wait for security clearance by MHA. Now in this regard, Naveed sir has done an extensive discussion on Amendment of General Financial Rules 2017 to impose restrictions on bidders from countries which share land border with India on grounds of defense and national security. The main intention behind carrying out these amendments seems to be cornering out both China and Pakistan. Pakistan has always been out of these projects, but China has been, and Chinese companies has been a major stakeholders in India's development in recent past. But now with these amendments, it would be very difficult for Chinese firms to operate in our country. In the same discussion, he had also discussed provisions of Article 257, which ensures the control of union over states in certain cases. So it is important that you revise those. Then an editorial, Fall of Hong Kong, on page number 7 has been left out specifically because I had in DNS dated 3rd of July discussed the issue of Hong Kong starting back in 1842 and then finally in 1997 when UK-China signed joint declaration in which one country and two system was adopted, ensuring the protection of capitalist system and way of life of Hong Kong. In the same DNS we discussed the major issues between Hong Kong and China, mainly with respect to cultural differences, as Hong Kong is Cantonese speaking, whereas mainland China mainly speaks Mandarin. And what are the major differences over politics or political autonomy of Hong Kong, centering around the issue of election of the CEO and the manner in which these elections are carried out. It's time for us to take up the question of the day. The question of the day for 26th of July was the early harvest scheme sometimes seen in news deals with which one among the following? And the right answer is it is a precursor to implementation of FTA. It is a precursor because it helps the two trading countries to identify certain products for tariff liberalization pending the conclusion of the full-blown FTA. So the minor issues are resolved early, and that is called early harvest scheme. The question of the day for today, that is 27th of July 2020, is consider the following statements. 1. Contempt of court is given as an exception in Article 19(2). Statement 2. Contempt of court has been defined in our constitution. Which of the above statement is our correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, D. none of the above.